Hi drivers, my name is Paul Taylor. I'm a trucking attorney, a trucking employment lawyer for truck drivers, and I'm with the law firm Truckers Justice Center. It's that time of year again when weather's going to start getting really bad at times. And I want to make you aware of the protections that you have from retaliation from trucking companies, from your employers, a private carrier or a for-hire motor carrier, when you refuse to drive because driving would be dangerous due to weather conditions. Now there's a DOT regulation, it's at 49 CFR Part 392.14, which essentially says that when weather becomes hazardous through sleet, snow, ice, wind, rain, smoke, several other things, you shall reduce speed to a prudent level. And when conditions become sufficiently dangerous, those are the terms the regulation uses, then you shall cease operations. So suppose that you're in a situation where you and your boss are at loggerheads over whether or not you should be driving. Normally a court's going to defer to a driver's call and say essentially the driver is the captain of the ship when it comes to determining whether or not to drive in bad weather. But I had one judge say, yes, Mr. Taylor, it's true, the driver is captain of the ship, but the captain has to be able to explain himself to the admiral. So, are you protected from retaliation for refusing to violate the bad weather rule? Absolutely. The employee protection provisions of the Surface Transportation Assistance Act prohibit an employer from retaliating against an employee, and for purposes of that law, an owner-operator or leased operator is an employee, because that driver/employee refuses to drive where driving would result in an actual violation of a commercial vehicle safety regulation. So you have to be able to prove that an actual violation of 392.14, the bad weather rule, would have occurred if you hadn't refused to drive due to weather conditions. Or you have to be able to prove that you had a reasonable belief that driving would be unsafe. And reasonable belief means objectively and subjectively reasonable. Would another commercial vehicle driver in the same condition of you believe it was unsafe? So let's take bad weather conditions. If a storm is forecasted out 2 days from now, the northeast United States is going to be blanketed with snow and ice, and you say, I'm not going to drive the next 2 days or in 2 days. That probably is not sufficient for you to be protected from retaliation, which could be suspension, firing, warning letters, points, or verbal warning. You know, you do not want to be, we know weather can change. So, in a case called R&L versus Rob Fink, Fink versus R&L, the driver anticipated out reasonably that conditions would be sufficiently dangerous that he shouldn't be driving. Now, anticipating out 2 days is not reasonable. At least a court's not going to find it unreasonable. You know, normally you want to give the carrier some warning, saying, hey, I've been looking at the bad weather reports forecasted for tomorrow evening. The governor says to, reduce speed. The Weather Channel is predicting high winds. 12 hours out may not be enough to say, I'm not going to drive 24 hours from now. 12 hours probably is enough, but it may not be. Normally you want to deal with the facts that you're facing at the time. And the law doesn't protect you from retaliation for refusing to drive to work in bad weather. If you can't get to work, but it's safe to drive a semi because you live 70 miles from the office or the terminal, you're not going to be protected by that provision. But if you're facing at that time, you're looking, it's time to go, 2 hours before it's time to go, and you're watching the Weather Channel, and your route of travel where you're going to be in 4 hours actually is in the middle of the mess. High winds, blowing snow, low visibility, trucks running off the highway. Those are the types of situations and the type of evidence you want to protect yourself when you refuse to drive due to hazardous weather conditions. Having a little bit of dust in the snow isn't going to cut it, unless maybe there's high winds. A lot depends on the circumstances. So is it dangerous now, or is it going to be, you're forecasted to go out in 4 hours or 5 hours? Is the forecast for dangerous weather then? Yes, you're protected under the law. Now, part of having one of these cases is good documentation, all right? Which means you've called DOT. What are the roads reporting? Maybe they have a recorded message you can record. You watch the Weather Channel. You download information from the Weather Channel. You monitor the television stations. Now, having that kind of documentation, that will prove that weather conditions were so dangerous or so likely to become dangerous as to make it unsafe to drive. So we know truckers are going to run into situations where, particularly new ones, where it might be a different standard. The question is, what is your experience? What's your level of experience? What's your expertise? Do you have experience driving in snow, ice, etc.? So it has to be objectively reasonable that you anticipated that the weather was going to be too unsafe to safely drive. Now, what happens if you're fired for refusing to drive in bad weather? You've probably got a pretty good claim under the Surface Transportation Assistance Act, which would give you the remedy of reinstatement if you win, back pay, mental pain, damages if proven, and attorney's fees. So documentation is important to every case, but in particular to weather cases. Now, I've had cases where drivers have called me and said, well, I refused to drive on February 20th because there was heavy snow, and then we go to the National Weather Service records and we don't have any heavy snow. No, none, zero. And the driver might have been off on the days. It's important, not only do you have some proof that your refusal to drive be objectively reasonable based on your experience. You can't just say, I refuse to drive in winter because I have no experience. And that you clearly communicate to the employer, give them some advance notice. It's looking bad. I don't think I'm going to be able to come to work, but let's watch the conditions. And finally, when you have to make that call at 2 hours before dispatch time, say, look, I've been looking at the weather reports. This is not safe, and back it up with an email, text message, Qualcomm, whatever you do to communicate. Thanks for watching.